Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's going to be my first look lineup for week 2 of the NFL season over on DraftKings. And keep in mind, a lot can change throughout the week. This video is being recorded on Monday night, so yeah, a lot's going to change by the time Friday rolls around when I do my final picks video, but that's when we polish things up, and we'll go on from there. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. I'll be here all season long talking picks, strategy, lineups, amongst other things. So if you think that sounds cool and you're going to hang out for the rest of the year, you might as well hit that subscribe button so you stay notified whenever I post new content. And if you want to take that one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. We have an awesome Discord community and a bunch of extra content over there that I do think you'll find quite valuable, including projections, optimizers, spreadsheets. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by Prize Picks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests, or salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. Just you versus the props that they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, for new signee over on Prize Picks, you can get a free money bonus. That's an instant deposit match up to $100 when you use code CPENN and tell them I sent you. But I think that's it for the plugs for the most part, so without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position, and up top, we have the most expensive one here, Kyler Murray, $8,200, who just got done destroying the Tennessee Titans defense. They put up a lot of points. He had 5 touchdowns total, 4 through the air, 1 on the ground, 20 rushing yards, close to 300 passing yards, a couple touchdowns to his guy D-Hop, a couple to Christian Kirk, got Chase Evans involved, Rondell Moore got a few catches, even AJ Green was there, and I think it's another really good spot here versus Minnesota. This should be a very high-scoring game. We got a 51-point over-under here, only a 4-point spread, so it should be pretty back and forth. We know Minnesota's defense is not that great. Kyler Murray, one of the best, if not the best, fantasy quarterback in all of the NFL, so if you have the money for him, great, but I think he's only a tournament option for me because of that price point, because I want to afford some more expensive wide receivers and running backs, but if you are doing a game stack here, by all means, go for Kyler Murray. Russell Wilson's also in a very good game environment here. We have a 54.5-point over-under with a pretty tight spread. Both these defenses aren't that great. The Titans just got absolutely destroyed by Kyler Murray, the guy we just talked about. Russell Wilson had a good game versus the Colts. This is a much softer spot here. He's got DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett to get the ball to. He's got Gerald Everett at tight end. This should be a very good game for Russell Wilson. He's a guy that's usually quite efficient when it comes to throwing for touchdowns, and I think that's going to happen here once again. I don't see anybody on Tennessee stopping a guy like DK Metcalf. I think he absolutely eats them up. Maybe Russell Wilson's better suited for tournaments because of his price point. There are some better quarterbacks, I think, that have similar upside at cheaper price points like we're going to talk about very soon here, but I love this game. I'm definitely going to target it for tournaments. And dropping on Tom Brady here, $6,900, just got done destroying the Dallas Cowboys in the first game of the season, Thursday Night Football in prime time. Absolutely killed them, had over 300 yards, had a handful of touchdowns, and he's got so many good weapons to get the ball to. The only concern here is, well, first off, it's over a 50-point over-under. I believe it's sitting at 52 right now, opened at 49 or 50, now with a 52, 52.5. The problem is they are 13-point favorites at home, which doesn't usually bode well for the passing attack because they usually get up by a lot. Then they can run the ball at the end of the game. The thing is with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they have no problem at all just chucking it the entire game. And if they're going to get there, it's probably through the air. And Tom Brady can definitely do that. His trio of wide receivers are insane. Antonio Brown, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, even a couple of decent backup guys like Scotty Miller, Rob Gronkowski. I used to call him the corpse, but he actually looked pretty good last week. Kind of looked spry, had 2 touchdowns. We know him and Tom Brady have had a connection for decades now, it feels like. So got a couple decent pass catching running backs. Leonard Fournette and Giovanni Bernard kind of disappeared after that fumble. So yeah, I like the Buccaneers quite a bit. I like Tom Brady. I like his price point being below 7K. I'm just not a big fan of this large point spread at 13 points that just scare me. And there's a couple quarterbacks that are priced right below him in what should be a very back and forth game with a higher over-under that I think are better suited for either cash games or just projection-wise overall this week. Speaking of those 2 quarterbacks, they're right below them, Dak Prescott and Justin Herbert. This game currently features a 55.5-point over-under, and the point spread I believe is only a few points here. I had to pull it up, but last time I looked, it was very close, I think sitting at 3 points. So this should be pretty back and forth. Dallas Cowboys defense is absolutely terrible, and they're going to get in shootouts all season long. Obviously have a ton of weapons and a bad defense, which really bodes well for fantasy points because that means they have to throw the ball the entire game. They have to play at a faster pace, and Cowboys have these skills players to make that work. Or Dak Prescott here just had a fantastic game versus the Bucs. I mean, for the Cowboys to stay relevant this year, Dak Prescott's going to have to go off pretty much each and every single week, and I think he's capable of doing that. Before he got hurt last year, he was averaging like 400 passing yards per game, throwing the ball around 45 times per game. And he's got 2 amazing receivers in Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb's got to fix a couple drops that he had last week, but even then, Dak Prescott missed him on a couple plays. Unfortunately, he did lose Michael Gallup. He's going to be out for several weeks, but Cedric Wilson should be able to fill in quite nicely. The Cowboys are 3-point dogs here. They're on the road. I think they're going to throw the ball a lot once again. Zeke just does not look very good. I realize it was a very tough matchup versus the Buccaneers, but if this team wants to stay relevant, They're probably going to throw the ball a lot. Their defense is just not to be trusted, and I think Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen can eat them up. So Dak Prescott, one of my absolute favorite plays on the slate at quarterback. Dropping down right below me, I have Justin Herbert, who threw for over 300 passing yards in the first week versus the Washington defense, which is a lot better than the Dallas Cowboys. So I think there's a very high ceiling for Herbert here. They have one of the highest implied team totals in the entire slate. Highest over under the week and only a 3-point spread here. He's got Keenan Allen to get the ball to. He's got Austin Eckler. He's got Mike Williams. He's got Donald Parham. I love this spot quite a bit. So I think it's really between Dak Prescott or Justin Herbert for our lineup here. I'm going to go with Justin Herbert just because he's $100 cheaper, and I think this is going to be a fantastic game for him. You could go either way. I do like Austin Eckler quite a bit. The thing is, even though we got no targets last week, you could pair Justin Herbert with Austin Eckler, and it still looks pretty good. I might end up changing my mind here, but I think either Dak Prescott or Justin Herbert's the way to go. We'll plug in Herbert for right now, but we could switch that later on. Moving on to the running back position, you can spend top dollar for guys like CMC, Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry. I have no problem with that whatsoever. I'm kind of trying to save some money a little bit, probably attack the mid-range this week. And my favorite running back on the entire slate, once you factor in the price point right now, I think it's going to be Najee Harris at $6,300. I realized he was pretty bad. His debut week 1 versus the Buffalo Bills just couldn't really get anything going. His offensive line is obviously not very good whatsoever, which is definitely a concern. But he played 100% of the snaps. I believe they played 55 snaps total. He was on the field for each and every single one. That's all I can ask for a guy that's $6,300. We know he's a talented running back. There was a reason the Steelers went out there and got him. He's the only guy back there. I would take the 100% snap rate each and every single day at $6,300 and a good matchup versus Las Vegas Raiders. Just a few minutes ago, Tyson Williams had a 31-yard rushing touchdown versus them. I think Lamar Jackson just threw a touchdown versus them, and they're just having success overall. So the Las Vegas Raiders defense looks like it's going to be pretty bad once again. They struggled versus running backs last year, allowing I think they're top 5 in points allowed per game to the running back position. So Najee Harris, I think he's going to bounce back here in a big way. I'm hoping last week's game keeps people off him, but I think in cash games, $6,300, that is really hard to pass up in my opinion, especially being favorites at home. I'm looking for an RB2. I think there's a couple options here. I think a lot of people are going to play Nick Chubb this week. He gets a fantastic matchup versus Houston. Cleveland's in a great spot here. They look very good versus KC. Nick Chubb had success versus the Chiefs. Really, they were a couple blunders away from winning that game versus the Chiefs on the road in Arrowhead. This Browns team is going to be very good. They did lose their left tackle, Jedrick Wills. X-rays did come back negative, although I'd be kind of surprised if he comes back this week. But even then, Chris Hubbard stepped in well at the left tackle position for the Browns, and I think they're going to be just fine versus the Texans. They're not as good as a team as they looked last week versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, where they were absolutely stomping them. The Browns are one of the absolute best teams in the NFL. And no, I'm not being a biased Browns fan here. I think everybody can admit we're handing it to the Chiefs early on, and they hung with them the entire game. They were very close to winning that game until Baker ended up getting picked off at the very end. But Nick Chubb being 13-point favorites at home here, this sets up very well for him because he's not the pass-catching running back backfield. Yes, he gets a couple targets here and there per game, but that's pretty much Kareem Hunt's role. I think they're going to have to throw the ball too much here. Nick Chubb should be able to run the ball into the ground 20-plus times, and they're going to have success. Last year, the Texans were the absolute worst run defense in football, allowing the most points per game to the position. They were nearly dead last DVA versus the run. Nick Chubb, in my opinion, is the best pure running back in football. He can rip off long runs each and every single week. He's got the best offensive line blocking for him. I think Nick Chubb is a fantastic play here. I'm going to try to fit him in. We could go with Austin Eckler. If we could fit in Najee Harris with Nick Chubb and Austin Eckler, I think that's probably the best way to go this week. For right now, though, we're going to plug in Chubb. I'm a believer in the talent. The guy's amazing, and I love this matchup versus the Houston Texans. Up top, it's really hard to go wrong with any of these options. DeAndre Hopkins gets a good matchup versus Minnesota. They got killed by wide receivers last season. Jamar Chase exploded versus them, over 100 total yards, had a nice long touchdown versus them, even though we kind of struggled with drops in the preseason. Kind of shut everybody up with that really impressive week 1 performance versus the Vikings. DeAndre Hopkins had a great week 1. I don't think we'll have any problem here versus the Minnesota defense. Stephon Diggs didn't really have the best of game, neither did the Bills overall. They get a pretty tough matchup here versus the Miami Dolphins. DK Metcalf is going to be a very enticing option here. He did get into the end zone week 1. Gets a great matchup versus Tennessee. And if you're playing Russell Wilson, I definitely want to get either one of or both of Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf in this game. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to afford Metcalf because I already have Nick Chubb and Najee Harris in here. But if you had the money for him in your lineups, great, go for it. Love him in tournaments. So if you play him in cash games, by all means, go for it. But since we have Justin Herbert as our quarterback right now, I think we should probably plug in Keenan Allen because it just makes a ton of sense. He had a pretty solid game overall versus the Washington defense. This is obviously a much softer spot here versus the Dallas Cowboys. They were terrible versus wide receivers last season. I think we're going to see more of the same once again. I know Mike Evans kind of got shut down last week, but Chris Godwin had a great game. Antonio Brown had a great game. Rob Gronkowski had a good game. I don't think Keenan Allen's going to struggle here whatsoever. One of the best pure route running wide receivers in all of football. He's going to find ways to get open. Even though the defense can kind of key on him a little bit, he still should be just fine. At $7,000, I think he's one of the better wide receiver plays on the entire slate. And some other guys priced right beside him. We have Amari Cooper, who exploded week 1 versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Then we have CeeDee Lamb at $6,400. Michael Gallup is going to be out for this game. So these two, who got a ton of targets in week 1, are going to be hyper-targeted once again. If I had to pick between the two, I'm going to go with CeeDee Lamb over Amari Cooper just because I think he's more talented. I know he had the worst game between the two, but he still was over 100 yards and got into the end zone. There was a couple drops that were a little bit ugly, but at $6,400, it's kind of hard not to like CeeDee Lamb, who had 15 targets last week. Wouldn't be surprised if he sees double digits, if not closer to 15 once again here. But the thing is, with Michael Gallup being out, that opens up an opportunity for a guy like Cedric Wilson at only $3,100 to have a pretty valuable role in this offense. And as of right now, obviously things can change throughout the week, but he definitely looks like the best value play at wide receiver this week. Last week we had a ton of good 3K wide receiving options. Not really the case this week, but Cedric Wilson at $3,100 in what should be a very high scoring game. No Michael Gallup, he's going to be thrust into a starting role. Dallas runs a ton of 3 wide receiver sets. I'm liking Wilson a lot here, and he makes sense in this lineup as a nice run back option for Justin Herbert. He's about half the price of guys like CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper. Not saying he's a better play overall, because projection-wise, that's not even close, but point per dollar-wise, he definitely looks pretty good, and he fits well in this lineup because I can't just plug in Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb because I already have guys like Najee Harris and Nick Chubb, which take up a little bit of salary, and I have Keenan Allen. So as much as I like to get them in, I'm just not sure I can quite afford it yet. If we can at the end, great. If not, don't think it's the end of the world. Then moving down to some other guys I like, I obviously love that Tennessee-Seattle game. So a guy like A.J. Brown I think is one of the better plays in the entire slate. He's cheaper than he was last week. Didn't exactly have the greatest game, although the Titans overall were absolutely terrible. Their offensive line really struggled. Chandler Jones absolutely ate up Ryan Tannehill. He's probably going to have nightmares for weeks to come from that game because he was just getting absolutely blasted. But A.J. Brown is one of the best overall wide receivers in football. I'm assuming there's going to be a shootout. I think the Titans are going to be trailing in this game, so they might have to throw the ball once again. Derrick Henry didn't really get going until they were down a bunch of scores, and they just kept running the ball, so Derrick Henry finally was getting some chunk yardage. But I think at one point, he had like 9 carries for 7 yards in that game, and I think they could struggle once again. But it's easier to throw in Seattle than it is to run on them. And A.J. Brown at below $7,000, I think he's an excellent tournament play, and you can make a case for him in cash games as well. That's not sure I'm going to be able to afford him in this lineup. Julio Jones is fine, but to be honest, I'd rather just get up to A.J. Brown. The trio of Tampa Bay wide receivers are definitely going to be on my radar here. They're all pretty close in pricing. Chris Godwin's the most expensive, with Mike Evans being the second most, and then Antonio Brown, who I personally think is the wide receiver one in this offense. He's only $6,000, and I think that's a mistake. I love Antonio Brown this week. If we can afford him at the end here, I would love to throw him in the wide receiver 3 spot, or I guess wide receiver 2. I kind of plugged Cedric Wilson at wide receiver 2, but I'd love to get one of these Tampa Bay wide receivers. I mean, the Atlanta Falcons were terrible versus them last season. The Philadelphia Eagles wide receivers last week actually performed pretty well. Jalen Reagor, Devonta Smith, even the tight ends got some action as well. So I think any of these guys are going to be fine. If I had to pick one, though, I would take the guy that led the team in targets last year, and target share, I should say, and he's the cheapest at $6,000. He was uber talented. Antonio Brown had a long touchdown last week, over 100 receiving yards, and should be quite busy in this game. And moving on to the tight end position, Travis Kelce is not on the main slate. He's in one of the primetime games. I believe they're playing the Baltimore Ravens this week, so we don't have to worry about wanting to roster Travis Kelce or not, because he's always a big question mark. Do I want to spend top dollar for a tight end? Do I not? Well, we don't have Travis Kelce, so the next best guy is Darren Waller. And while he is one of the best tight ends in football, $7,600 versus the Steelers does not look too appealing for me on this slate. Obviously, George Kittle is going to be an option. Kyle Pitts, I don't want to say he busted last week. He only had 7 fantasy points, but he was pretty cheap at $4,400. But he is one of the most physically gifted tight ends in the NFL, and I'm expecting the Falcons to have to throw the ball a lot once again this week. They're 13-point dogs on the road. Tampa Bay's defense is not very good versus the pass. They are stout versus the run. They're definitely a lot worse versus the pass, and Kyle Pitts should be quite busy in this game. I'm expecting over a handful of targets. He's going to be lined up as a wide receiver, kind of all over the field. The guy is huge. He's going to be a red zone target. I think he's going to have a much better game this week, assuming that Ron play as bad as he does last week. So I think at $5,200, he's still actually a pretty good bargain. Playing Kyle Pitts, you could go on the opposite of this game. We have Rob Gronkowski, who had 2 touchdowns last week. I know he's not the most exciting guy to roster these days because he's not the same old Gronk, but he actually didn't look too bad just athleticism-wise last week. He's able to get open. Those were to find Gronk, and it's a good matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons. Would not be surprised if he finds the end zone once or twice once again. But what might be my favorite tight end play in the slate once you factor in the price point, we have Tyler HIGBEE, who is the clear #1 tight end in this offense. No other tight end saw a single target in this game. And the offense for the Rams with Matthew Stafford under center looks really, really good. Stafford looked great last week. I think he's going to look really good once again here versus the Indianapolis Colts. And Tyler HIGBEE was quite busy. He had 6 targets, caught 5 of them, had a decent chunk of yards. And at $4,100 for a guy that should see a decent amount of targets and is actually a pretty solid tight end, I would take that all day at $4,100 with Matthew Stafford throwing the football, which should be a very solid offense this season. At this point, we only have a few spots left. We have a wide receiver 3, which I guess technically a wide receiver 2, a flex spot, which could go either way at running back or wide receiver, and then we have a defensive spot, which I'm not really sure exactly where I want to go with defense yet. I think the most obvious option here would probably be the Cleveland Browns versus the Houston Texans, but they're kind of expensive at $3,500. This is a good defense, though. Do not be scared of what happened versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Every team kind of sucks versus the Kansas City Chiefs defensively because it's impossible to guard Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, and Travis Kelce. You can try. It's just very hard to do. But I think they're going to bounce back in a big way versus the Texans. Do not be scared of the Texans putting up like a bunch of points last week versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think that's an anomaly. Can't see that happening again. I'm not sure, though, what I'm going to do here because I usually just try to spend down at defense, although I'm not really liking any of these defensive options, to be honest. The Steelers defense could be fine versus the Las Vegas Raiders. It's actually a decent pairing with Najee Harris. The Browns would be a good pairing with Nick Chubb as well because it makes sense to have your running back with your defense paired up because assuming they're winning the game and they can just run the ball and grind it out. So I think the Browns and the Steelers look pretty good. We'll plug in the Steelers. They looked good last week versus the Buffalo Bills, who are a pretty stout offense. They were great last year. Kind of stifled them for the majority of the day. If we plug in the Steelers here at 3K, we have $6,000 left per player, so we should be able to get a pretty decent running back or wide receiver combo. We fill out our wide receiver position first. I don't mind getting one of those Tampa Bay wide receivers, or I would love to get one of the Seattle wide receivers, or one of the Titans wide receivers. I'm not sure we're going to be able to quite afford AJ Brown. I'll plug him in at $1,600, but that's going to leave us $5,100 left for our last position. And I'm not really sure there's anybody I want in this price point. We do have Eli Mitchell here for the San Francisco 49ers, who looks like he's going to be the lead back. He's actually quite productive once Raheem Mostert got hurt, and Raheem Mostert's going to be out, I think I saw around 8 weeks, so obviously don't have to worry about him. Trey Sermon was a healthy and active, which I think means that Eli Mitchell is probably going to be the starting running back here. It's going to be kind of TBT, so we'll see where Trey Sermon stands by the end of the week. Have to see the practice reports and what Kyle Shanahan says, although Kyle Shanahan kind of screwed us last week because he said nothing about Brandon Ayuk and nothing happened for Ayuk. I don't know if he's getting disciplined. He barely played in the first quarter. I don't know. It sucked. I like Brandon Ayuk a lot because I think he's super talented, but it was the Deebo Samuel show, and Ayuk did absolutely nothing, so that kind of sucked. So we're going to have to kind of play around with some Shanahanigans. I wouldn't say it's a great spot versus Philly, but this offense should be able to roll, and you can't really pass up a $5,000 starting running back in what should be a very, very good team this year. So I actually don't hate the look of that. It's TBT on Eli Mitchell. If you don't want to go the Eli Mitchell route and you don't really trust that, we could take away AJ Brown. You could throw in a guy like CeeDee Lamb. I wouldn't mind that whatsoever. If we could fit CeeDee Lamb here, I'd feel actually really good about that. I know you're kind of doubling up on the Dallas Cowboys wide receivers, but I think it's totally fine because there's going to be a lot of targets for all of those guys this season. The problem is I'm not really in love with any of these players that we get left with. Like we have Chase Claypool. That's fine. DJ Chark. We're too expensive for Juju Smith-Schuster. Mike Davis. Hate the matchup versus Tampa Bay. T. Higgins got into the end zone. Don't really love the matchup versus Chicago though. So maybe if we save some money, get one of those Tampa wide receivers. I said I liked Antonio Brown quite a bit, his price point. He's the cheapest wide receiver of the bunch, although I think he's the best wide receiver on the field. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and if we go that route, we have now $6,000 left, which affords us some better options like Cooper Kupp. He was fantastic week 1. The problem is I already have a pass catching option for the Rams. I think they can both be viable, and they both were viable last week, so it's an option. I'm just not sure I want to go that route in this lineup. We do have Brandon Cooks, though. He was really good in week 1, over 100 yards, and I'm expecting the Texans to be trailing quite a bit in this game. We already have Nick Chubb in this lineup, assuming that the Browns are going to be winning this game and just pounding the rock, so I think Brandon Cooks is actually a fine run back option. He's the clear wide receiver 1 in this offense. Tyrod Taylor, not the most exciting quarterback out there. Though this is his old team, I'm not sure he cares about that, so maybe there's a little bit of revenge narrative there. Either way, the Browns defense kind of got pieced up by a guy like Tyreek Hill last week. I think it's definitely going to be improved. I don't think this is a super soft matchup for Brandon Cooks, but they're 13-point dogs on the road. They're probably going to throw the ball quite a bit, and Brandon Cooks is definitely the guy you're going to want in this offense. So I actually don't think that looks too bad whatsoever. And just looking up and down our lineup, I think this actually looks pretty solid. We have Justin Herbert at quarterback, paired up with Keenan Allen, which should be a very high-scoring game, 55 points as of right now with a pretty tight spread. We have Cedric Wilson with the run back, the clear wide receiver 3 in that offense with Michael Gallup being out. 2 really good running backs in Najee Harris and Nick Chubb. Probably going to see a floor of like 40 total touches combined between the two. Then you have Antonio Brown, a great matchup versus Atlanta, who looked fantastic in week 1, got loose for a long touchdown. Tyler Higbee was busy for the Rams. He's only $41, the clear tight end 1 in that offense. Brandon Cooks was great in week 1. Gets I would say, an okay matchup versus Cleveland. I would say it's a super soft matchup, but they're going to be trailing a lot, so he might get some easy garbage yards in the second half. And the Steelers defense, just because they're facing the Vegas Raiders, they're home favorites, and it's a nice pairing with Najee Harris. With that being said, I think that'll be pretty much it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by PrizePicks. Just you versus the projections, and as of right now, if you're a new signee over there, you can get a free money bonus up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. I think that'll be pretty much it. I will stop rambling. I'll see you guys on the next video.